Jake Morrison was a giant among men. At 6 feet and 8 inches tall, he towered over everyone in the small town of Hush, Montana. His boots added another 2 inches to his height, making him look like a mountain that walked. When he entered the local diner or general store, people would stop talking and stare. Not because they were afraid of him, but because seeing Jake was like watching a legend come to life. The Wistba Ranch had been Jake's home for 16 long years. He knew every fence post, every water hole, and every cow by name. The ranch stretched for thousands of acres across the Montana plains, with rolling hills that seemed to go on forever. It was beautiful land, but it was also lonely land. Jake liked it that way. Every morning, Jake woke up before the sun. His cabin sat on a small hill about 2 miles from the main ranch house. It was a simple place with 1 bedroom, a kitchen, and a living room that he rarely used. The walls were bare, except for a few old photographs of the ranch. There were no pictures of family or friends. Jake had made sure of that years ago that he would make his coffee black and strong, just like his grandfather had taught him. While the coffee brewed, he would stand on his porch and look out over the land. The silence was complete except for the wind moving through the grass and the distant sound of cattle. This was how Jake liked to start each day. No words, no noise, just peace. The work on the ranch was hard, but Jake was harder. He could lift fence posts that took 2 normal men to carry. He could rope a steer faster than anyone in 3 counties. When a bull got mean and dangerous, the other ranch hands would call for Jake. He never used harsh words or violence. He just looked at the animal with his calm gray eyes, and somehow the beast would settle down. The other workers respected Jake, but they also kept their distance. In 16 years, none of them had been inside his cabin. They knew better then to ask personal questions. Jake would give orders when needed, answer questions about the work, and that was all. When the day ended, he would tip his hat and walk back to his hill, leaving the others to their jokes and stories. Tommy Rodriguez had worked at the ranch for 5 years. He was a good worker and a smart man, but he had never figured out Jake Morrison. One evening, after a particularly hard day fixing fences, Tommy tried to start a conversation. "Jake, you want to come into town with us tonight? There's a new bar that opened up. They say the food is good." Jake looked at Tommy for a long moment. His gray eyes seemed to see right through him. "Thanks, but no," Jake said simply. "You boys have fun." That was the longest conversation Tommy had with Jake in 5 years. The people in Hush had their own ideas about Jake Morrison. Some said he had been hurt by a woman long ago and never got over it. Others thought he was just born to be alone. The older folks remembered when Jake first came to town. He had been different then, younger, more open, quick to smile. But something had changed him, and now he was like a ghost that lived among them but never really belonged. Mrs. Peterson ran the general store in town. She had known Jake since he arrived, and she worried about him. Every month he would come in to buy supplies. Coffee, canned food, soap, and other basic things. He never bought anything that wasn't necessary. No candy, no magazines, no little treats that made life more pleasant. "That boy needs someone to take care of him," she would tell her husband. "It's not natural for a man to live like that." But Mr. Peterson would shake his head. "Some people are meant to be alone, Martha. Jake seems happy enough." Happy was not the right word for Jake Morrison. Content, maybe? Or perhaps just numb. He had built his life like a fortress, with walls so high that nothing could get in to hurt him. But those same walls also kept out everything good. The seasons changed on the ranch, but Jake's routine never did. Spring brought new calves and long days in the saddle. Summer meant cutting hay and checking water holes during the hot months. Fall was roundup time, when the cattle were gathered and sorted. Winter was the hardest season, with snow that could last for months and temperatures that dropped far below zero during the worst storms. Jake would sometimes go days without seeing another person. He would check on the cattle, make sure they had shelter and food, then return to his cabin. The silence during these times was so complete that it felt like the world had ended and left only Jake behind. He had books in his cabin, old westerns and farming manuals mostly, but reading required Thinking and thinking sometimes led to remembering. Jake preferred to keep his mind busy with work and his hands occupied with tasks that needed doing, the ranch owner. Old Bill Wistba had tried many times over the years to get Jake to move closer to the main house. "You're getting older, Jake," he would say. "It might be nice to have some company." But Jake would always refuse politely. The hill where his cabin sat was his territory. It was the place where he felt safe from the world and all its complications. As the years passed, Jake's hair grew gray at the temples. Lines appeared around his eyes from squinting into the sun. His hands became rough and scarred from years of hard work. But his strength never faded, and neither did his determination to live life on his own terms. The townspeople had given up trying to include Jake in their community events. They invited him out of politeness, but they knew he would never come. Christmas parties, 4th of July barbecues, church socials, Jake Morrison was always invited and always absent on quiet evenings. When the work was done and the sun was setting over the mountains, Jake would sometimes stand on his porch and wonder if this was all there was to life. 16 years of the same routine, the same silence, the same careful distance from everyone around him. But then he would remember why he chose this life, and the wondering would stop. The pain that drove him to this place was still there, buried deep but never forgotten. It was easier to live with loneliness than to risk that kind of hurt again. At least loneliness was predictable. It couldn't surprise you or betray you or leave you wondering what you did wrong. So Jake Morrison continued his quiet life on the Wistba Ranch, a giant among men who had chosen to make himself as small and invisible as possible. He had no way of knowing that his carefully ordered world was about to change forever. The woman who would challenge everything he believed about safety and solitude was already on her way to Hush, Montana, driving a beat-up truck and carrying dreams of her own. Maya Rodriguez saw the sign for Hush, Montana, just as her truck started making that awful grinding noise again. She pulled over to the side of the empty highway and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was so complete it made her ears ring. After living in Chicago for 8 years, she had forgotten what real quiet sounded like. She stepped out of the truck and stretched. The Montana sky was bigger than anything she remembered from her childhood in Texas. It seemed to go on forever, painted in shades of blue that had no names. The air was clean and cold, making her lungs feel like they were waking up after a long sleep. Maya was not a small woman. She had curves in all the right places and had learned long ago to be proud of her body instead of ashamed of it. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes sparkled with intelligence and humor. At 32, she had lived enough life to know what she wanted and what she didn't want anymore. What she didn't want was another day in the city, working for a veterinary clinic that cared more about money than animals. What she didn't want was another night in the apartment she had shared with her ex-husband, where every corner held a bad memory. What she didn't want was to spend one more minute pretending that her life was working when it clearly wasn't. What she did want was a fresh start in a place where nobody knew her story. She wanted to use her skills to help animals without someone looking over her shoulder every minute. She wanted to wake up in the morning without feeling like she was drowning. The job posting for a veterinarian in Hush had seemed like a sign from heaven. The town needed someone to take over for old Doc Harrison, who was finally retiring after 40 years of service. The pay wasn't great, but it came with a small house and the promise of enough work to keep her busy. Most importantly, it was exactly 1,047 miles away from her old life. Maya coaxed her truck back to life and drove the last 5 miles into Hush. The town was smaller than she had expected, just one main street with a few shops and businesses. There was Peterson's General Store, Maggie's Diner, a gas station, a bank, and not much else. The veterinary clinic sat at the end of the street, a small white building with a red cross painted on the door. She parked in front of the clinic and sat for a moment, looking at what would be her new workplace. It was nothing like the fancy animal hospital in Chicago with its gleaming equipment and sterile atmosphere. This place looked like it had been built 50 years ago and hadn't changed much since then. but it felt honest and real in a way that her old job never had. The key was under the mat, just like Doc Harrison had promised. Maya opened the door and stepped inside. The smell hit her immediately, that familiar mix of antiseptic, animal fur, and something else she couldn't quite identify. It smelled like a place where real work got done. The clinic was simple but clean. There was a waiting area with plastic, chairs and old magazines. The examination room had a metal table and basic equipment. In the back, there was an office with a desk covered in papers and a small apartment with a bed, kitchenette, and bathroom. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. Maya spent the rest of the day unpacking her truck and getting settled. Her belongings didn't amount to much: some clothes, books, her medical equipment, and a few pictures of the family she had left behind in Texas. She had gotten rid of everything else when she left Chicago. Starting over meant traveling light. By evening, word had spread through Hush that the new vet had arrived. Mrs. Peterson from the general store was the first to stop by with a casserole and a smile. "Welcome to Hush, dear," she said, bustling into the clinic like she owned the place. "I'm Martha Peterson. My husband and I run the general store. We're so glad you're here." Poor Doc Harrison was getting too old to handle the heavy work. Maya accepted the casserole gratefully. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the drive had taken longer than expected. "Thank you so much. This is very kind." "Oh, it's nothing." Mrs. Peterson waved her hand. "We take care of each other here. That's how small towns work. Now, let me tell you about some of the ranchers you'll be working with." For the next hour, Mrs. Peterson filled Maya in on the local gossip and ranch politics. Most of the ranchers were good people who paid their bills and treated their animals well. There were a few difficult ones who would try to argue about every charge, and then there was Jake Morrison. "Now, Jake is different," Mrs. Peterson said, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "He works for the Wistba ranch, been there for years. Tallest man you ever saw, and the quietest, too. He takes good care of the animals, but he doesn't say much to anybody. Don't take it personal if he seems unfriendly. That's just his way." Maya filed this information away. In her experience, the quiet ones were often the most interesting. They usually had stories to tell, even if they kept those stories to themselves. The next morning, Maya officially opened for business. Her first patient was a border collie named Scout who had gotten into a fight with a porcupine. The dog's owner, a rancher named Bill Thompson, watched nervously as Maya worked to remove the quills. "Doc Harrison always said this was the trickiest part," Bill said. "Scout here never learns to leave those porcupines alone." Maya smiled as she worked. "Don't worry. I've dealt with plenty of porcupine victims. Scout will be fine, but you might want to keep him closer to home for a few days." Word of Maya's skill spread quickly through the ranching community. She had steady hands and a gentle touch with frightened animals. More importantly, she listened when ranchers described their problems and offered practical solutions that made sense. Unlike many vets who had come from the city, Maya understood ranch life. She had grown up around cattle and horses in Texas, and she knew that sometimes the simplest treatment was the best treatment. She didn't try to oversell expensive procedures or medications that weren't necessary. Within a week, Maya had settled into a routine. She saw patients at the clinic in the mornings and made ranch calls in the afternoons. The countryside around Hush was beautiful, with rolling hills and endless sky. It reminded her why she had fallen in love with veterinary medicine in the first place. The people of Hush were welcoming in a way that city folks never were. They brought her food, offered help with her truck, and included her in their conversations, like she had lived there for years. Maya found herself laughing more than she had in months, but even in this friendly community, she kept hearing about Jake Morrison. Everyone knew him, but nobody really knew him. He was like a puzzle that no one had been able to solve. Maya found herself curious about this mysterious giant who lived alone on a hill and spoke only when necessary. She didn't have to wait long to meet him. On her 8th day in Hush, the phone rang early in the morning. Old Bill Wistba was on the other end, and his voice was tight with worry. "Doc, I need you to come out to the ranch right away." My prize bull, Thunder, is down and won't get up. Jake thinks it might be poison, but we're not sure. Can you come now?" Maya grabbed her bag and headed for her truck. As she drove toward the Wistba ranch, she wondered if she would finally meet the famous Jake Morrison. She had no idea that this emergency call would change both of their lives forever. The ranch was bigger than Maya had expected, with modern buildings and well-maintained fences. She could see cattle scattered across the hills in the distance. It was the kind of operation that took real skill and dedication to run properly. Old Bill met her at the gate, his weathered face creased with worry. "Thank God you're here, Doc. Thunder's in the barn. Jake's with him now." As they walked toward the barn, Maya felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. She told herself it was just first-day jitters, but she knew it was something more. She was about to meet the man who had captured the imagination of an entire town, and she had no idea what to expect. Maya stepped into the barn and immediately understood why people called Jake Morrison a giant. He was kneeling beside a massive black bull, but even on his knees, he seemed to tower over everything around him. His shoulders were broader than any man she had ever seen, and his hands looked like they could bend steel without trying, but it wasn't his size that caught her attention. It was the way he was stroking the bull's neck, speaking to the animal in a voice so soft she could barely hear it. There was a gentleness in his touch that surprised her. This was not what she had expected from the mysterious loner everyone talked about. "Jake," Old Bill called out. "This is Dr. Rodriguez, our new vet." Jake looked up, and Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and deep and full of intelligence. For a moment they looked at each other in complete silence. Maya felt like he was seeing right through her, reading her story without her permission. "Ma'am," Jake said simply, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deeper than she had expected, with a rough quality that suggested he didn't use it very often. "Please call me Maya," she said, setting down her medical bag and moving toward the bull. "What can you tell me about Thunder here?" Jake shifted to give her room but stayed close to the bull's head. "Found him down this morning when I came to check the herd. He's been trying to get up but can't seem to manage it." "No obvious injuries?" "Breathing is shallow and his temperature feels high." Maya knelt beside the bull and began her examination. Thunder was indeed magnificent, probably weighing close to 2,000 pounds. His black coat was glossy and well-maintained, showing that he received excellent care. But something was definitely wrong. As she worked, Maya was aware of Jake watching her every move. It wasn't judgmental or suspicious. He seemed genuinely interested in how she approached the problem. Most ranchers would hover nervously or pepper her with questions, but Jake simply observed in silence. "Can you help me roll him slightly to the left?" Maya asked. "I want to check his abdomen." Jake moved with surprising grace for such a large man. His touch was firm but careful, and Thunder seemed to trust him completely. The bull didn't struggle or try to kick. Even though he was clearly uncomfortable, Maya palpated Thunder's belly and listened to his heart and lungs. The symptoms were becoming clearer. "Has he been grazing in any new areas lately?" she asked. "Moved the herd to the north pasture 3 days ago," Jake replied. "There's good grass up there, but it's been a while since we used it." "I think he might have eaten something toxic," Maya said, continuing her examination. "Possibly wild cherry leaves or some kind of poisonous plant. The good news is that if we caught it early enough, we can treat it." She opened her medical bag and began preparing injections. "I'm going to give him activated charcoal to absorb any remaining toxins, plus some medications to support his liver and kidneys. But we'll need to get him on his feet and walking as soon as possible." "Whatever you need," Old Bill said from where he stood watching. "Thunder's worth more than my truck and tractor combined." Maya noticed that Jake winced slightly at this comment. She got the impression that he thought of Thunder as more than just a dollar amount. For the next 2 hours, Maya worked to stabilize the bull. Jake helped without being asked, anticipating what she needed before she had to say it. He held Thunder's head steady during injections and helped position the animal for treatments. His presence seemed to keep the bull calm even during uncomfortable procedures. You're good with animals, Maya commented as she administered another dose of medication. Thunder trusts you completely. Jake was quiet for so long that Maya thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, "Animals don't lie to you. They don't pretend to be something they're not." There was something in his voice that made Maya look at him more closely. For just a moment, she saw past the carefully controlled exterior to something raw and hurt underneath. But then the mask slipped back into place, and he was just the quiet rancher again. By afternoon, Thunder was showing signs of improvement. He was more alert, and his breathing had returned to normal. Maya felt confident that he would make a full recovery, but she wanted to monitor him for another few hours to be sure. "I'd like to stay until evening if that's okay," she told Old Bill, "just to make sure he's stable before I leave." "Of course, Doc. Jake, can you stay with her?" "I need to check on the other herds." Jake nodded once. Old Bill headed out, leaving Maya alone with the giant cowboy she had heard so much about. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Jake seemed perfectly content to sit quietly while Maya checked on Thunder every 30 minutes during one of her examinations. Maya noticed that Jake had pulled out a worn paperback book. She glanced at the cover and was surprised to see it was a classic novel, not the Western or farming manual she might have expected. "Good book?" she asked, genuinely curious. Jake looked up, seeming almost embarrassed to be caught reading. "It's all right," he said. "Helps pass the time. I love that author," Maya said. "Have you read his other works?" Something flickered in Jake's eyes, a spark of interest that he quickly suppressed. "A few," he admitted. Maya decided to take a chance. "There's a scene in that book where the main character talks about how silence can be more honest than words. It reminds me of working with animals. They communicate without saying anything at all." Jake studied her face for a long moment. "Most people don't understand that," he said quietly. "They think if you're not talking, you're not thinking." "Some of the smartest people I know are the quiet ones," Maya replied. "They're usually too busy observing to waste time with small talk." For the first time since she had met him, Jake almost smiled. It was just a tiny lifting at the corner of his mouth, but it transformed his entire face. Maya felt her heart skip a beat. "Thunder's looking much better," she said, turning back to the bull to hide her reaction. "His color is good, and his temperature is almost normal." "You saved his life," Jake said simply. "Old Bill was right to call you." "We saved his life," Maya corrected. "I couldn't have done it without your help." "You know this animal better than anyone?" Jake seemed surprised by the compliment. "Just doing my job," he said. "No, it's more than that. You care about these animals. It shows in how you handle them." They continued to work together as the afternoon wore on. Maya found herself stealing glances at Jake when she thought he wasn't looking. He moved with a quiet confidence that she found attractive. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary noise. Everything he did had purpose. When Thunder finally struggled to his feet near sunset, Maya felt a surge of professional satisfaction. The bull was weak but stable, and she was confident he would make a full recovery. "That's what I like to see," she said, packing up her equipment. "He should be fine now, but I'll check on him again tomorrow." "I'll watch him tonight," Jake said. "Make sure he stays steady." Maya looked at this giant of a man who was willing to lose sleep to watch over a sick animal, and she felt something warm unfold in her chest. There was more to Jake Morrison than the town gossips knew. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. You made this a lot easier than it could have been." Jake touched his hat brim again in that old-fashioned gesture she was beginning to find charming. "Just glad Thunder's okay," he said. As Maya drove away from the Wistba ranch, she found herself thinking about storm-gray eyes and gentle hands. She had come to Hush looking for a fresh start and a quiet life. She hadn't expected to find herself intrigued by a man who seemed determined to remain a mystery, but there had been moments during the day when she glimpsed something deeper in Jake Morrison. Something wounded but not broken. Something lonely but not bitter. Something that made her want to know more about the giant cowboy who read classic novels and spoke to animals in whispers. Maya had always been good at reading people, and her instincts told her that Jake's silence wasn't born of rudeness or arrogance. It was protective, like armor worn by someone who had been hurt badly enough to need it. As she settled into her small apartment above the clinic that night, Maya found herself wondering what had happened to make Jake Morrison choose such a solitary life. And despite all her promises to herself about focusing on work and staying out of complications, she couldn't shake the feeling that Jake Morrison was going to be anything but simple to forget. 3 weeks after Thunder's recovery, Maya found herself driving to the Wistba ranch for the third time that month. It wasn't unusual for a large ranch to need veterinary services regularly, but Maya was beginning to suspect that some of these calls weren't entirely necessary. The first call had been for a horse with a supposedly twisted ankle that turned out to be perfectly fine. The second was for a cow that Old Bill thought might be pregnant, which required only a simple examination. Today's call was about a group of calves that seemed to be coughing. Though Jake had mentioned on the phone that they appeared healthy otherwise, Maya didn't mind the extra visits. The Wistba Ranch was her biggest client, and the work was interesting. But she was honest enough with herself to admit that the real reason she didn't mind was Jake Morrison over the past few weeks. He had surprised her in small ways. He always helped with her equipment without being asked. He anticipated her needs during treatments with an intuition that came from years of working with animals. And occasionally he would share small observations about the cattle or the weather that showed how closely he paid attention to the world around him. More importantly, Maya was beginning to see past the careful walls Jake had built around himself. When he thought no one was watching, she caught glimpses of humor in his gray eyes. When he worked with young animals, his touch was incredibly gentle. And once, when a calf had recovered from an illness, she had seen him actually smile with genuine pleasure. Maya parked her truck near the barn and gathered her equipment. She had started bringing a thermos of coffee on her ranch visits, partly because the work could be long and tiring, but mostly because she had noticed Jake always declined Old Bill's offers of refreshments. She suspected he was too polite to ask for anything for himself. "Morning, Jake," she called as she approached the pen where he was examining a group of young calves. "Morning, Dr. Rodriguez," he replied, touching his hat in that gesture she had grown to expect. "Maya?" she corrected automatically. "I keep telling you to call me Maya." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am, Maya." The way he said her name in that deep, careful voice made something flutter in her chest. She busied herself with setting up her equipment to hide her reaction. "So, what seems to be the problem with these little ones?" she asked. Jake moved closer to help her with the examination table. "Started coughing yesterday evening. Thought it might be dust pneumonia, but they're eating fine and seem active enough." Maya began examining the calves one by one. They were healthy, beautiful animals with bright eyes and strong bodies. Their lungs sounded clear, and their temperatures were normal. If they had been coughing, it was likely due to dust or dry conditions. "Not illness. Their breathing sounds good," she told Jake. "I think you're right about dust being the culprit. Have you had much rain lately?" "Been dry for 3 weeks," Jake confirmed. "Wind's been stirring up a lot of dirt." As Maya continued her examinations, she pulled out her thermos and poured coffee into 2 cups she had brought. "Coffee?" she offered, extending 1 cup toward Jake. Jake looked at the offered cup like it might bite him. "That's kind of you, but I don't want it to take your coffee." "I brought enough for both of us," Maya said simply. "Besides, I hate drinking alone." After a moment's hesitation, Jake accepted the cup. "Thank you," he said quietly. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, sipping coffee and monitoring the calves. Maya found herself stealing glances at Jake's profile as he watched the animals. His face was weathered from years of outdoor work, but there was something almost aristocratic about his features. He had strong bones and kind eyes, and Maya wondered what he might look like if he ever truly relaxed. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said, setting down her coffee cup. Jake tensed slightly, as if preparing for an uncomfortable question. "Sure," he said, though his voice was cautious. "How long have you been working with cattle?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Since I was a boy, he said. My grandfather had a small ranch in Wyoming, taught me everything he knew before he passed. Is that where you learned to read animals so well? You have an amazing intuition about what they need. Jake was quiet for so long that Maya thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, animals are honest. They don't hide what they're feeling or pretend to be something they're not. Makes them easier to understand than people. There was something in his voice that made Maya want to ask more questions, but she sensed that pushing would only make him withdraw. Instead, she said, "That's a gift. Not everyone can read animals the way you do." Jake looked at her with those storm-gray eyes, as if trying to figure out whether she was being sincere or just making conversation. Whatever he saw in her face seemed to satisfy him because some of the tension left his shoulders. My grandfather used to say that God gave animals pure hearts because they needed to survive in a world full of humans, Jake said. Always thought there was truth in that, Maya smiled. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. He was, Jake agreed. Only person who ever really understood me. The admission slipped out so quietly that Maya almost missed it. When Jake realized what he had said, a flush crept up his neck, and he turned his attention back to the calves with sudden intensity. Maya pretended not to notice his embarrassment. Instead, she continued her examination while keeping up a gentle stream of conversation. About the animals, the weather, and other safe topics. Gradually, Jake began to relax again, as the morning wore on. Maya found herself enjoying Jake's company more than she had expected. He didn't fill the silence with unnecessary chatter, but when he did speak, his observations were thoughtful and often surprisingly insightful. He noticed things that most people missed and remembered details about individual animals that showed how much he cared about his work. When Maya finished examining the last calf, she pronounced them all healthy and recommended some simple measures to reduce dust in their environment. Jake listened carefully to her suggestions and asked intelligent questions about implementation. I'll move them to the south pasture this afternoon, he said. Grass is better there, and it's more sheltered from the wind. That should help, Maya agreed. But call me if the coughing gets worse or if you notice any other symptoms. She began packing up her equipment, trying to think of a reason to extend the visit. Jake seemed more relaxed than she had ever seen him, and she wasn't ready for their conversation to end. More coffee? She offered, holding up the thermos. Jake looked at his empty cup as if he was surprised to find it that way. If you don't mind, he said. Maya refilled both their cups and leaned against the fence rail. The morning sun was warm on her face, and the view across the ranch was spectacular. Rolling hills stretched to the mountains in the distance, painted in shades of green and gold that seemed to glow in the clear air. This is beautiful country, she said. I can understand why you love working here. Jake followed her gaze across the landscape. It's peaceful, he said. Quiet, no complications. There was something wistful in his voice that made Maya look at him more closely. Do you ever miss the complications? She asked gently. Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. No, he said firmly. Simple is better. Maya sensed she had hit on something important, but she also knew better than to push. Instead, she said, simple has its advantages, but sometimes complications can be worth it. Jake looked at her then, really looked at her, as if he was seeing her for the first time. You sound like someone who's had experience with complications, he said. Maya laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. More than my share, she admitted. That's actually why I came to Hush. I was looking for simple too. Did you find it? Maya considered the question seriously. Since arriving in Hush, her life had indeed been simpler in many ways. Her work was straightforward, her relationships with the townspeople were uncomplicated, and she slept better than she had in years. But sitting here with Jake, feeling this unexpected connection, she realized that simple might not be what she wanted after. Oh, I'm not sure, she said honestly. I thought I wanted simple, but maybe what I really wanted was just something real. Jake studied her face with those penetrating gray eyes. Real can be complicated too, he said quietly. Sometimes, Maya agreed, but at least it's honest. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Maya found herself reluctant to leave, and she got the impression that Jake wasn't eager for her to go either. But eventually, practical considerations won out, and she loaded her equipment back into her truck. "Thanks for the coffee," Jake said as she prepared to drive away. "And for taking care of the calves." "Thanks for the help," Maya replied. "And for the conversation, I enjoyed it." Jake nodded once, but Maya thought she saw something warm in his expression before he turned away as she drove back to town. Maya reflected on the morning's visit. She was definitely developing feelings for Jake Morrison, and she suspected the attraction might be mutual. But she also sensed that getting close to him would require patience and careful attention to boundaries he had spent years establishing. The question was whether she was brave enough to try. Maya had come to Hush to heal from her own emotional wounds, and getting involved with someone as clearly damaged as Jake could be risky. Maya had been in Hush for 2 months when she finally decided she was tired of dancing around her feelings for Jake Morrison. The man was clearly interested in her, but he seemed determined to keep their relationship strictly professional. Every conversation they had was pleasant and sometimes even meaningful, but Jake always maintained careful boundaries that kept her at arm's length. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Jake called about a mare that was having trouble foaling. Maya arrived at the ranch to find him in the barn, his shirt sleeves rolled up and sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "How long has she been in labor?" Maya asked, immediately moving to examine the struggling horse. "About 6 hours, Jake replied, his voice tight with concern. "I've been with her all night. The foal seems to be positioned wrong." Maya could see the worry in his gray eyes as he watched her examine the mare. This wasn't just professional concern. Jake genuinely cared about every animal on the ranch, and watching them suffer affected him deeply. "You're right about the position," Maya confirmed after her examination. "But I think we can turn the foal without too much trouble. I'll need your help, though." For the next 3 hours, they worked together to help deliver a healthy colt. It was difficult, messy work that required them to coordinate their movements perfectly. Maya found herself constantly aware of Jake's presence beside her, his strong hands supporting the mare while she maneuvered the foal into the correct position. When the colt finally slipped into the world, wet and struggling, both Maya and Jake let out simultaneous sighs of relief. The mare immediately began cleaning her baby, nickering softly in a way that spoke of pure maternal love. "Beautiful," Maya whispered, watching the colt try to stand on wobbly legs. "Yeah," Jake agreed, but when Maya glanced at him, she realized he was looking at her, not the horses. Their eyes met for a moment that seemed to stretch forever. Maya felt her heart race as she saw something vulnerable and unguarded in Jake's expression. But then he looked away, and the moment was broken. "I should clean up," Maya said, suddenly aware that she was covered in mud and worse. "There's a washstand." "Outside," Jake offered. "I'll get you some clean towels." They walked out of the barn together, and Maya began washing her hands and arms at the outdoor sink. Jake brought her towels and fresh water, hovering nearby in a way that suggested he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "That was good work," Maya said, trying to fill the silence. "You really know what you're doing with horses." "Learned from necessity," Jake replied. "Can't always wait for a vet when animals are in trouble." Maya dried her hands and turned to face him. The morning sun was bright on his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the silver threads in his dark hair. He was incredibly handsome in a rugged, unpretentious way that made her pulse quicken. "Jake," she began, then stopped. She had been about to thank him for his help, but suddenly she was tired of safe, polite conversation. She was tired of pretending. She didn't feel the electricity between them every time they worked together. "What is it?" Jake asked, noticing her hesitation. Maya took a deep breath and made a decision that surprised even her. "Is your bed still empty, Jake?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Jake's eyes widened, and for a moment he looked like he had been struck by lightning. The color drained from his face, then rushed back in a wave of red that climbed from his neck to his hairline. "What?" he whispered, as if he couldn't believe what he had heard. "You heard Me? Maya said, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Is your bed still empty? Because life's too short to sleep alone when you don't have to. Jake stared at her for a long moment, his gray eyes wide with shock and something else she couldn't quite identify. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Dr. Rodriguez. Maya, she corrected automatically. Maya, he repeated, her name sounding different in his mouth now, more intimate somehow. I don single quotes ... I can single quotes to ... Can't what? Maya asked gently. Can't admit that there's something between us? Can't acknowledge that every time we're together, the air practically vibrates with tension? Jake took a step backward, as if her words were physically pushing him away. You don't understand, he said desperately. I don't do relationships. I don't do complications. Who said anything about complications? Maya asked. I'm talking about two adults who are attracted to each other. It doesn't have to be complicated unless we make it complicated. Jake shook his head, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that spoke of deep agitation. You don't know me, he said. You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me, Maya said, taking a step toward him. Help me understand. For a moment, she thought he might actually open up to her. Something flickered. In his eyes, a longing so deep it took her breath away. But then his expression shuddered and the walls slammed back into place. I should get back to work, he said stiffly. Thank you for helping with the mare. Jake, wait, Maya called as he turned to walk away. He stopped but didn't turn around. Don't, he said quietly. Please don't. Don't what? Don't ask questions. Don't care about you. Don't notice that you're the loneliest man I've ever met? Jake's shoulders tensed as if her words had hit their mark. Some people are meant to be alone, he said without turning around. Bullshit, Maya said bluntly. Nobody is meant to be alone. Some people choose to be alone because they're afraid of being hurt, but that's not the same thing. Now Jake did turn around and Maya was shocked by the pain in his eyes. You think this is about fear? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. Isn't it? Maya challenged. Someone hurt you badly, so you decided it was safer to live like a hermit than risk being hurt again. Jake's jaw clenched so tightly that Maya could see, the muscles jumping in his cheek. You don't know what you're talking about, he said. Then tell me, Maya repeated. Help me understand why a man who is clearly capable of love and tenderness chooses to live like he's already dead. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He actually staggered backward, his face going white. I'm not dead, he said hoarsely. Aren't you? Maya asked, pressing her advantage. When was the last time you laughed? When was the last time you did something just because it made you happy? When was the last time you let yourself feel anything besides duty and obligation? Jake stared at her, his breathing shallow and rapid. Maya could see that she had pushed him too far, but she couldn't stop now. Something told her this might be her only chance to break through the walls he had built around himself. I'm not asking you to marry me, Jake, she said more gently. I'm not asking you to promise me forever. I'm just asking if you're tired of being alone, because I am. I came to Hush looking for peace and quiet, but what I found was you. And despite everything I told myself about staying uninvolved, I can't stop thinking about you. Jake closed his eyes as if her words were causing him physical pain. Maya, he whispered. I know you feel it too, she continued. I see it in the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. I feel it in the way your hands shake sometimes when we're working close together. I hear it in your voice when you say my name. Jake opened his eyes and Maya was startled by the raw vulnerability she saw there. You're asking me to risk everything, he said quietly. I'm asking you to risk something, Maya corrected. Not everything. Just enough to see if this thing between us is real. Jake looked at her for a long moment and Maya held her breath. She could see him wavering, see the battle being fought behind his storm-gray eyes. For a moment she thought she had won, but then he shook his head and stepped away from her. I can't, he said simply. I'm sorry, but I can't. He turned and walked toward the barn, leaving Maya standing alone by the washstand. She watched him go, her heart sinking with disappointment and something that felt dangerously close to heartbreak. But as Jake reached the barn door, he stopped and looked back at her. The expression on his face was so full of longing and regret that Maya felt tears prick her eyes. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "my bed has been empty for 16 years. And some nights that feels like the loneliest thing in the world." Then he disappeared into the barn, leaving Maya alone with her racing heart and the knowledge that she had just changed everything between them, for better or worse. Maya didn't see Jake for 3 days after their confrontation at the washstand. When he finally called, his voice was carefully neutral, requesting her services for a routine cattle vaccination. Maya's heart hammered as she drove to the Wistba ranch. Unsure of what to expect, she found Jake in the main corral, already setting up the cattle chute for the vaccinations. He looked up when she arrived, and their eyes met briefly before he looked away. The easy companionship they had been building was gone, replaced by an awkward tension that made Maya's chest ache. "Morning," Jake said quietly, touching his hat, brim in that familiar gesture. "Good morning," Maya replied, keeping her voice professional. "How many head are we doing today?" "About 50, Jake answered, "mostly yearlings." They worked in silence for the first hour, their previous easy rhythm replaced by careful politeness. Jake helped with the cattle and held them steady for injections, but he was careful not to let their hands touch. Maya found herself missing the comfortable conversations and shared coffee breaks that had become the highlight of her ranch visits. By the time they had vaccinated half the herd, the tension was becoming unbearable. Maya finally set down her syringe and turned to face Jake directly. "Are we going to pretend the other day never happened?" she asked. Jake's hand stilled on the gate latch. "Might be best," he said without looking at her. "For who?" Maya challenged. "Because this awkwardness isn't working for me." Jake finally met her eyes, and Maya was surprised to see that he looked as miserable as she felt. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't been sleeping well, and there was a tightness around his mouth that spoke of stress. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted quietly. "Do what? Talk about feelings, relationships, any of it?" Jake leaned against the fence rail, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "I've spent 16 years avoiding exactly this kind of conversation." Maya felt some of her anger soften. "Why?" she asked gently. "What happened 16 years ago?" Jake was quiet for so long that Maya thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Her name was Sarah," he said. "We were engaged." "Had the whole thing planned out?" "Wedding, house, kids, the whole American dream." Maya waited, sensing that interrupting would cause Jake to retreat back into silence. "I thought she loved me," Jake continued, his gray eyes fixed on some distant point. "Thought we were happy. But a month before the wedding, she came to see me. Saw she couldn't go through with it. Said I was too quiet, too simple, too boring." The pain in Jake's voice made Maya's heart clench. She could picture him 16 years younger, probably still hopeful about love and the future, having his world shattered by someone he trusted. "She said she needed someone who could give her excitement and conversation and all the things I couldn't provide," Jake went on. "Said she was in love with her Lauer, some smooth-talking city guy who knew how to make her laugh." "Jake," Maya said softly, but he held up a hand to stop her. "The worst part wasn't that she left," he said. "The worst part was that she was right. I'm quiet, I'm simple. I don't know how to make clever conversation or buy fancy things or be anything other than what I am." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. "There's nothing wrong with being quiet," she said. "There's nothing wrong with being simple." Jake looked at her then, and the vulnerability in his expression nearly undid her. "There is if it's not enough," he said. "If the person you love looks at you and sees someone lacking." "Sarah was an idiot," Maya said fiercely. "And if she couldn't see what an amazing man you are, then she didn't deserve you." Jake shook his head. "You don't understand. After she left, I started paying attention to what people really thought of me. The pitying looks when I couldn't keep up with conversations. The way people would talk around me like I wasn't even there. Sarah just said out loud what everyone else was thinking. Maya wanted to argue, but she could see that Jake truly believed what he was saying. 16 years of isolation had convinced him that his ex-fiancée's cruel assessment was accurate. So you decided to prove her right? Maya asked. You chose to become the hermit she accused you of being? I chose to accept reality, Jake corrected. Some people are meant for love and relationships. Some people aren't. I'm one of the ones who isn't. Maya felt a surge of anger, not at Jake, but at the woman who had damaged him so badly and at all the people who had made him feel less than worthy over the years. Can I tell you something? Maya asked, about why I really came to Hush. Jake nodded, seeming grateful for the change of subject. I was married for 5 years to a man who made me feel like I was never enough, Maya began. David was charming and successful and everything everyone thought I should want. But he was also controlling and dismissive and emotionally abusive. Jake's attention sharpened, his protective instincts engaging even through his own pain. He never hit me, Maya continued, but he had other ways of making me feel small. He criticized everything I did, from how I dressed to how I laughed to how I practiced veterinary medicine. He made me feel like I was stupid and clumsy and lucky that someone like him would even put up with me. That's not true, Jake said immediately, his voice rough with indignation. I know that now, Maya replied. But at the time, I believed him. Just like you believe Sarah. When someone tells you repeatedly that you're not good enough, eventually you start to think they must be right. Jake was looking at her with new understanding, recognizing a kindred spirit in emotional damage. David cheated on me for the last 2 years of our marriage, Maya went on. When I finally found out and confronted him, he told me it was my fault. Said I was too fat, too boring, too focused on work to keep a man interested. He was wrong, Jake said fiercely. You're beautiful and intelligent and ... And you're kind and gentle and incredibly attractive, Maya interrupted. But we both chose to believe the people who hurt us instead of trusting our own worth. They looked at each other across the corral, two wounded souls recognizing their shared experience. I came to Hush because I was tired of feeling broken, Maya said. I wanted to find out who I really was when I wasn't being constantly told I wasn't enough. And you know what I discovered? What? Jake asked. That I'm actually pretty amazing when I'm not being torn down by someone who's supposed to love me. Maya said with a small smile. I'm good at my job. I'm funny when I'm comfortable. I'm passionate about things that matter to me, all the things David tried to make me forget about myself. Jake studied her face intently. You are all those things, he said quietly. And you're not the boring, simple man Sarah made you think you were, Maya replied. You're thoughtful and observant and incredibly skilled at what you do. You have depth and intelligence and a gentleness that's rare in this world. The fact that Sarah couldn't appreciate those qualities says everything about her and nothing about you. Jake looked away, clearly struggling with emotions he had kept buried for years. I don't know how to believe that, he admitted. Then let me help you, Maya said, taking a step toward him. Let me show you how I see you. Jake's breathing quickened. Maya, I'm not asking for promises, Maya said gently. I'm not asking you to trust me with your heart right away. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that maybe we both deserve a chance at something real. Jake looked at her for a long moment, and Maya could see the war being fought behind his gray eyes. Fear battled with longing, old pain wrestled with new hope. I don't know how to do this, he said again, but this time there was less conviction in his voice. Neither do I, Maya admitted. We can figure it out together. Jake closed his eyes and took a shaky breath. When he opened them again, Maya saw something different there. Not complete trust, but the beginnings of possibility. Okay, he whispered. Okay? Maya repeated, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Jake nodded slowly. Okay, but I need you to be patient with me. This is terrifying for me. Maya felt tears of relief and joy prick her eyes. I can be patient, she promised. We can go as slow as you need. Jake looked at her with wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe this was really happening. I haven't let anyone close in 16 years, he said. I know, Maya replied, but maybe it's time to try. They stood looking at each other across the corral, two people who had been hurt by love but were brave enough to risk it again. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture or a passionate declaration. It was something quieter but no less meaningful, the decision to be vulnerable with another person despite the risk. We should finish with the cattle, Jake said finally, but there was a warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. Yes, we should, Maya agreed, picking up her syringe with hands that shook slightly, but as they returned to work, Maya noticed that Jake no longer avoided her touch. When their hands brushed as they handled the cattle, he didn't pull away. And when she caught him watching her with those storm-gray eyes, he didn't immediately look elsewhere. It was a small beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. The change in Jake was gradual but unmistakable. Over the following weeks, Maya watched as the walls he had built around himself slowly began to crumble. It started with small things, a lingering look when he thought she wasn't watching, a smile that reached his eyes when she made a joke, conversations that stretched longer than strictly necessary. Their relationship developed with the careful pace of two people who had been badly hurt before. Maya kept her promise to be patient, never pushing for more than Jake was ready to give. In return, Jake began to open up in ways that surprised them. Both. It began with longer conversations during her ranch visits. Instead of discussing only the animals they were treating, they started talking about books they had read, places they had traveled, and childhood memories that made them laugh. Maya discovered that Jake had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he felt safe, and an unexpected knowledge of literature and history that came from years of solitary reading. Jake, meanwhile, found himself looking forward to Maya's visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified him. She brought warmth and laughter to his carefully ordered world, and he was beginning to remember what it felt like to truly connect with another person. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday afternoon when Maya was called out to treat a horse with colic. The storm had blown in suddenly, turning the ranch roads into muddy streams and making visibility nearly impossible. By the time Maya finished treating the horse, the rain was coming down so hard that old Bill insisted she wait it out rather than try to drive back to town. Storm should pass in an hour or two, he said, looking out at the sheets of rain pounding the ranch yard. Jake, why don't you take Dr. Rodriguez up to your place? It's closer than the main house, and she can stay dry there until the weather clears. Maya saw Jake tense at the suggestion. His cabin was his sanctuary, the one place where he felt completely safe from the outside world. She was about to decline the offer when Jake surprised her. That's fine, he said quietly. If you don't mind the simple accommodations. Maya felt her heart flutter with hope. This was a huge step for Jake, and she was honored that he was willing to take it. They rode to Jake's cabin in his truck, the windshield wipers barely keeping up with the torrential rain. Maya had imagined his home many times, but seeing it in reality was somehow both exactly what she expected and completely surprising. The cabin was small and neat, furnished with handmade wooden furniture that spoke of careful craftsmanship. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with an eclectic mix of novels, poetry, and reference books. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a comfortable reading chair positioned nearby. It was the home of a man who valued simplicity and solitude, but it was also warm and inviting in a way Maya hadn't expected. It's beautiful, Maya said, genuinely impressed. Did you make the furniture yourself? Jake nodded, looking pleased but embarrassed by her praise. Gives me something to do during the long winters. Coffee, please? Maya said, settling into the chair by the fireplace while Jake busied himself in the small kitchen. As Jake prepared coffee, Maya studied the books on his shelves. The collection was impressive and revealed depths to Jake's personality that he kept hidden. Classic literature sat next to modern fiction, philosophy texts beside poetry collections. There were books on ranching and veterinary medicine, but also volumes on art, music, and travel. You have amazing taste in books, Maya called out. I've read about half of these, and the other half are on my list. Reading helps pass the time, Jake said, returning with 2 mugs of coffee. Not much else to do when you live alone. Maya accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Do you ever get lonely? She asked gently. Jake settled into a chair across from her, considering the question seriously. I used to think loneliness was the price of safety, he said finally. Figured it was better to be alone than to risk being hurt again. And now? Jake looked at her with those storm-gray eyes that had become so dear to her. Now I'm starting to think maybe I was wrong. Maybe some risks are worth taking. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Maya set down her coffee cup and leaned forward slightly. Jake, she said softly, can I ask you something? He nodded, though she could see tension creeping into his shoulders. When you look at me, what do you see? The question seemed to surprise him. What do you mean? I mean, when you really look at me, what do you see? Because I need you to know that when I look at you, I don't see someone who's boring or simple, or not enough. I see a man who's intelligent and kind and incredibly attractive. I see someone who cares deeply about the things that matter and who has more integrity in his little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. Jake's breath caught and Maya could see emotion flickering across his face. I see a man who's been hiding his light under a bushel for 16 years because someone made him believe he wasn't worth loving, she continued. But that person was wrong, Jake. She was so wrong it breaks my heart. Jake set down his coffee with shaking hands. Maya, he whispered. I'm falling in love with you, Maya said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I know that probably scares you, and I know we're supposed to be taking things slow, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it. Jake stared at her, his face cycling through a dozen different emotions. You can't, he said finally. Can't what? Can't love you? It's too late for that. You don't know me well enough, Jake protested. You're seeing what you want to see, not what's really there. Maya stood up and crossed to his chair, kneeling beside it so she could look directly into his eyes. Then tell me what's really there, she said. Tell me all the things you think are wrong with you, and let me decide for myself. Jake looked down at her and she could see the battle raging in his expression. I'm not exciting, he said quietly. I don't like crowds or parties or small talk. I'd rather read a book than go to a movie. I don't have big dreams or ambitions. I just want to do my work and take care of the animals and live quietly. Those aren't flaws, Maya said softly. Those are some of the things I love about you. Not good with words, Jake continued, as if he hadn't heard her. I don't know how to be romantic or charming. I've never brought a woman flowers or written a love letter or any of the things men are supposed to do. Maya reached up and touched his face gently. Jake, look at me. Reluctantly, he met her eyes. I don't need flowers or love letters, she said. I need honesty and kindness in someone who sees me for who I really am. I need someone who makes me feel safe and valued and cherished. You do all of those things just by being yourself. Jake leaned into her touch, his eyes closing as if her words were causing him physical pain. I'm scared, he whispered. I know, Maya said. So am I, but I'm more scared of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Jake opened his eyes and looked at her with such vulnerability that Maya felt tears prick her own eyes. I don't want to hurt you, he said. You won't, Maya replied with certainty. You're not capable of the kind of cruelty that hurts people. Your heart is too good. Jake reached up and covered her hand with his own, pressing her palm more firmly against his cheek. I think I'm falling in love with you too, he said so quietly she almost missed it. Maya felt her heart soar. Yeah, Jake confirmed, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Scares the hell out of me, but yeah, Maya laughed, tears of joy streaming down her face. Good scared or bad scared? Good scared, Jake said, his smile growing wider. Like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing you're about to jump, but wanting to anyway? Maya leaned forward and kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Jake responded tentatively. At first, then with growing confidence as he realized she wasn't going to disappear or change her mind when they finally broke apart. They were both breathing hard. Jake rested his forehead against hers, his eyes still closed. "I haven't kissed anyone in 16 years, he admitted. "You're a natural," Maya said, making him laugh. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking and kissing and gradually learning to be close to each other. When the rain finally stopped and Maya had to leave, Jake walked her to her truck with obvious reluctance. "Will you have dinner with me tomorrow?" he asked, the words coming out in a rush as if he was afraid he'd lose his nerve. "I'd love to," Maya replied, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him again. As she drove back to town, Maya felt like she was floating on air. It had taken months of patient work, but Jake's walls were finally coming down. And what she found behind them was even more wonderful than she had hoped. Jake Morrison was done hiding from love. And Maya Rodriguez was exactly the right woman to help him remember how to live again. 1 year later, Maya stood in front of her bathroom mirror, smoothing down her blue sundress and checking her reflection one more time. Today was the annual Wistba Ranch barbecue, and it would be the first time she and Jake appeared together, publicly as a couple. She was nervous but excited, ready to show the world what everyone in Hush already knew, that the lonely giant and the curvy veterinarian had found something special together. The past year had been a journey of discovery. For both of them, their relationship had unfolded slowly, like a flower blooming in its own time. Jake had kept his promise to try, and Maya had kept her promise to be patient. What they had built together was stronger because they had taken the time to do it. Right. Jake had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The perpetual sadness that had shadowed his gray eyes was gone, replaced by a warmth that made Maya's heart skip every time he looked at her. He smiled more, laughed more, and had even started joining in conversations at the diner when they went to town together. He was still quiet by nature, but it was the comfortable quiet of a man at peace with himself rather than the defensive silence of someone hiding from the world. Maya had changed too. The confidence she had lost during her marriage had returned. Stronger than ever, Jake saw her as beautiful and intelligent and worthy of love, and his unwavering support had helped her remember who she truly was. She felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. Loved not despite her flaws, but as a complete person worthy of respect and devotion. Their relationship had its challenges. Of course, Jake still struggled sometimes with old insecurities, and Maya occasionally had to resist the urge to push for more emotional intimacy than he was ready to give. But they had learned to communicate openly about their fears and needs, and they worked through problems together instead of letting them fester. Maya heard Jake's truck pull up outside the clinic, and felt the familiar flutter of excitement that his arrival still brought. Even after a year together, she never got tired of seeing him. If anything, her feelings had only deepened as she came to know the man behind the carefully constructed walls. Jake appeared in her doorway, and Maya's breath caught as it always did when she saw him. He was wearing his good jeans and a white, button-down shirt that made his gray eyes look even more striking. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he had shaved carefully, though he had kept the mustache that Maya loved to tease him about. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice warm with admiration. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Cowboy," Maya replied, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him hello. Jake's arms came around her automatically, holding her close for a moment longer than necessary. Maya marveled at how natural physical affection had become between them. The man who had flinched away from casual touch now reached for her hand without thinking, kissed her goodbye every morning, and held her close while they watched movies in his cabin. "Ready for this?" Jake asked as they walked to his truck. "Are you?" Maya countered, knowing that social gatherings still made him nervous. Jake considered the question seriously, as he always did. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think I am. It feels good to have something worth celebrating." The Wistba Ranch was transformed for the barbecue. Colorful bunting hung between the barn and the main house. Picnic tables were scattered across the yard, and the smell of barbecued beef filled the air. It seemed like half the county had turned out for the annual event, and Maya could see curious glances being directed their way as Jake helped her down from the truck. Old Bill Wistba was the first to greet them, his weathered face creased with a grin that suggested he took personal credit for their romance. "Well, if it isn't our favorite couple," he boomed, clapping Jake on the shoulder hard enough to stagger a smaller man. "Jake, you're looking mighty pleased with yourself these days." Jake actually blushed, but he was smiling as he shook his boss's hand. "Can't complain," he said simply. "Doc Rodriguez, you've worked a miracle with this one," Bill continued, winking at Maya. "Haven't seen Jake smile this much in all the years he's worked for me." Maya slipped her hand into Jake's, feeling him squeeze her fingers gratefully. "He was worth the wait," she said simply. They spent the evening mingling with neighbors and friends, and Maya was amazed at how naturally Jake fit into the social atmosphere when he wasn't trying to hide from it. He still didn't talk much, but when he did speak, people listened. His quiet observations and dry humor were appreciated by those who took the time to draw him out. Mrs. Peterson from the general store pulled Maya aside at one point during the evening. "I have to tell you, dear," she said, her eyes twinkling with satisfaction, "you've brought that boy back to life. I was starting to worry he'd spend his whole life alone on that hill." "He just needed someone to see past the walls?" Maya replied, watching Jake across the yard as he helped some of the ranch hands set up chairs for the older guests. "And he needed someone worth tearing those walls down for," Mrs. Peterson added with a knowing smile. As the sun began to set, painting the Montana sky in shades of orange and pink, Old Bill called for everyone's attention. A makeshift dance floor had been set up in front of the barn, and the small band that had been providing background music all evening moved into position for dancing. "All right, folks," Bill announced. "Time for some dancing. I want to see all you couples out there, showing us how it's done." Maya felt Jake tense beside her as couples began moving onto the dance floor. Dancing was definitely outside his comfort zone, and she was prepared to suggest they sit this one out when Jake surprised her. "Would you like to dance?" he asked quietly. Extending his hand toward her, Maya looked at him in amazement. "Are you sure?" Jake nodded, though she could see the nervousness in his eyes. "I'm not very good at it," he warned, "but I'd like to try." Maya took his hand with tears prickling her eyes. This was huge for Jake, stepping onto a dance floor in front of the entire community. It was a public declaration that he was no longer hiding from life. "I'd love to dance with you," she said softly. Jake led her onto the dance floor with careful dignity, positioning himself so that Maya was between him and most of the crowd. The band struck up a slow country ballad, and Jake pulled Maya into his arms with a gentleness that took her breath away. He wasn't lying about not being a good dancer. His movements were stiff and uncertain, and he spent more time watching his feet than looking at her. But there was something incredibly sweet about the way he concentrated so seriously on not stepping on her toes, and Maya found herself falling in love with him all over again. "You're doing fine," she whispered. Moving closer so that their bodies were pressed together, Jake relaxed slightly at her encouragement, and his arms tightened around her. "I never thought I'd be doing this," he admitted quietly. "Dancing at a barbecue?" "Dancing with someone I love in front of people who matter to me," Jake clarified. "A year ago, I would have said it was impossible." Maya looked up at him, seeing the wonder in his gray eyes as he spoke. "What changed?" she asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "You," Jake said simply. "You made me remember that being alive means more than just surviving." The song ended too soon, but Jake didn't immediately let her go. They stood together on the dance floor, holding each other and swaying slightly to music only they could hear. "I love you," Maya whispered against his chest. "I love you too," Jake replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I ever thought possible." As they finally left the dance floor, Maya noticed the approving smiles and gentle applause from their friends and neighbors. The people of Hush had watched Jake's transformation over the past year, and they were genuinely happy to see him finding joy again. The evening wound down slowly, with people gradually drifting home under the star-filled Montana sky. Jake and Maya were among the last to leave, helping Old Bill and the ranch hands clean up after the party. Thank you for tonight, Maya said as they drove back toward town. I know that wasn't easy for you. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering her words. It wasn't as hard as I thought it would be, he said finally. Having you there made all the difference. Instead of turning toward town and Maya's apartment above the clinic, Jake drove toward his cabin on the hill. It had become their routine over the past few months. Maya spent most nights at Jake's place now, though she kept her apartment for appearances and because some part of her wasn't quite ready to give up her independence completely. The cabin felt like home now in a way it never had when Jake lived. There alone? Maya's books were mixed in with his on the shelves, her coffee mug sat next to his in the kitchen cupboard, and her laughter had filled the quiet spaces with warmth and life. They prepared for bed. Jake seemed unusually quiet and thoughtful. Maya watched him in the mirror as she brushed her hair, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way he kept starting to say something and then stopping. "What's on your mind?" she asked, turning to face him. Jake looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes serious and intent. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "About what? About us, about the future." Jake took a deep breath, as if he was gathering courage for something important. "Maya, I know we've been taking things slow, and I appreciate your patience with me, but I don't want to waste any more time being afraid."